Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Open Minds. For anybody who might be new to this LinkedIn Live discussion, my name's Scott. I'm the host of Open Minds. And if people don't know who I am a bit of everything these days. I'm a creative strategist. I run a social enterprise. I'm also quite passionate about both mindset, leadership, and also social impact as well. And a big reason for why I am having a series like this is to really to promote and to support more long-form conversation. I feel like a lot of platforms these days there's a lot of discussion, which is I refer to as a bit one way, which is, here's 5 things for you to do. But I feel like there's so much that we can learn in the conversation, in the texture of it. And so I really wanted to be able to create a space for that. Now, I have been planning on doing this on a weekly basis, but the past couple of weeks have been pretty full on for me personally. I've been working on a bigger project that I'm really looking forward to sharing with everyone. However, I am really glad to be back live again because a few weeks back, I spoke to String Nguyen on the topic of mental health and especially our relationship with social media. And it was following that I had the great pleasure of connecting with Scott McLaughlin here, who we connected over the concepts of vulnerability, and we had this great discussion about what it means to be vulnerable. And that's where I also heard that Scott had been looking at this from a population perspective and community perspective in terms of vulnerable communities, as well as from a personal perspective as well. And he's now started a movement as well called Soften the Fuck Up. And so I knew that I really wanted to have a conversation with him and to explore a little bit deeper into vulnerability too. So Scott is a data-driven strategist. You're a leader of change and working with people with purpose, but you also work both with the vulnerable communities as well as yourself too. Scott, I'd love to, did I get that right? Or is there a bit more that you'd like to add to that?
Sounds pretty good, man. Yeah, that sounds pretty good. Not really, just to explain, the workplace stuff, and then we can carry into this space that we're intending to be. My company, The Art of More, has pointed itself at social services over the last year to make sure that, to actually build a model that predicts vulnerability in different communities. And the idea behind that is to ensure that social services are deployed where and when they're needed. So that's been a massive 180 for us because we're usually helping commercial customers sell things to people they don't need. Sorry, did I say that out loud? But it's been really good work to do, and it's been a massive challenge for us. And so that's my work side of it. This particular discussion, however, is around my personal blog. And my personal blog has been a journey. It's the 5th time I think I've had a personal blog, and probably the first time it's been genuine and authentically me instead of being something I thought other people wanted. And in this journey, I suppose, what was my ambition? It's interesting to hear you call it a movement, Scott, because, as far as I can see so far, it's a bit of a movement in my own mind. But I think the idea behind the expression was really a protest against that very common Australian saying, harden the fuck up. And basically drawn from the view in my own very personal experience with the fact that hardening up is really bad for us. It was particularly bad for me. And lots of things came crashing down for me about 7 years ago around being that person masked with a lot of ego and bravado and all that sort of thing. And I spent a lot of time sort of peeling the layers back off that and decided I wanted to share some of that journey and some of those lessons. I think in its expression, it's important to say that I don't consider myself an expert in misguided masculinity. I really don't. I've got things to say about that. And I'd also bring a caveat to that says misguided masculinity doesn't happen in men alone. It occurs all over with each sex and orientation. So I think my driver really was just to share some lessons. The name of it is really a protest. And really a call. I feel like maybe I'm not alone, that maybe there's a lot of people out there that go, God, I'm just so sick of being this person that the world asks of me, really. And I guess the way it presents itself is, for me, things I observe now is I have an observational self that sees myself now and says, oh, that's a bit misogynistic. Why'd you say that? And so lots of things I'm trying to clear out still that are happening out of my mouth, but they're not actually in my heart. So That's an ongoing project. I think I'd also say I've had a lot of really cool conversations with guys that seem to be longing for this, and women, actually. So friends of mine who've both said, wow, yeah, this is a really important conversation. And so let's just see where it goes. Yeah. I mean,
yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that, because I think you hit the nail on the head for quite a few different facets of what it means to, I guess, harden up to that sort of that masculinity side of it. But a lot of the other things that we're sort of talking around here at the moment is a bit of this concept of being vulnerable, right? That's one of the sort of key concepts that have been talked about a lot recently. And for me, I really like to start there. I'd love to, because I'm quite passionate, not passionate, rather, I'm quite intrigued sometimes by our relationships with the words themselves and our definitions of the word. So I'd like to ask you, what does vulnerability actually mean to you? What does that term really mean? What does it mean being vulnerable?
In the context of humans at an individual level, it's about, troubling personal circumstance, and I guess living in that and owning it. So, when we see vulnerability in the way we describe it in communities, we're talking about people who will require help to get through this pandemic and the economic effects of it, and also people that will require help that have never had that, needed to get that help before. And so that challenge is really about the equitable distribution of empathy. Whereas in the personal front, I kind of feel, vulnerability to me is just about standing in your truth and being able to express that without shame or regret, and being able to do that, more wholeheartedly, as Brene would say. So I've been a big fan of Brene's, which has been interesting. I met her 7 years ago, and I had to sneak into a women's breakfast to get there. So thanks to some women I worked with, I was an imposter. I didn't wear a dress or anything. I just, but yes, nonetheless, big fan. And I think that it's important to point out I want to say something about her work too, because I think it's awesome. What she has to say is generally awesome. What I found personally, which I think is important to point out, is I found that she was a bit of a beacon of hope. She was out there shining this big bright light upon me called vulnerability. And I figuratively was in this little dinghy boat in the dark, some miles away, not having any clue how to get to the light. And I think what I'm trying to do is start conversations that are about closing that gap. So that's an important thing point I want to make.
Absolutely. I follow some of Brene's work as well, and I think it's really great that she is able to be that beacon for people, and also that you had the I guess that drive to be involved in that conversation, because I think that's the type of thing that sometimes there can be perceptions around saying, well, there's an attachment to that word of vulnerability. What does that really look like? And I don't know if I'm ready for that yet. And so it does take a level of that self-awareness and courage in order to be able to get there. So I want to tease into that a little bit more, because there's a flip side of vulnerability, which is around, I guess, that authenticity component, which is, like you said, we have a way of being, a true way of being, that we sometimes either suppress or overlay or whatever that might be through the experiences that we have, right? There's almost a mask or an illusion around that. So what do you think are some of these problems or barriers that prevent people from softening up, that prevent people from being vulnerable? What have you observed in this?
Look, for me, I think there's a few things. You've got to, everything starts with awareness. And I think once you're cognitively aware that what you're doing and how you're living the world, in my case, how I was doing Scott, no longer was something I wanted to do. And I guess my driver for that, if I'm really honest, I think my esteem was so far down the toilet by the time when I started this work that my driver for that was my daughter. So she's 11 now, but that was a massive reason for me to go, you can be better than this. And so there begets a very long and continuous discipline of cognitive behavioral therapy that I've done every fortnight. And it's not a chore. It's been awesome, and it still is. I still get in there with somebody who's incredibly talented and is never afraid to call me on my shit. and it's awesome because I get to sit in that reality and go, wow, you're right. Like, and there is a lot I have to get rid of because there was a lot of top of me 7 years ago, an awful lot.
Mm.
Yeah,
it does. I would also like to go a little bit deeper into when we had a chat offline prior to this a few weeks ago. We also spoke of the idea of vulnerability as it pertains to men as well, because, and as you also introduced in your intro, the idea of harden the fuck up is often something that is quite, especially in Australia, it is quite a masculine component to it. And so sometimes they're not strictly speaking, but there can be that. So I'd love to kind of go a little bit deeper into that as well. So do you feel like there are different types of challenges that might separate how men treat it and how women might treat it, or just or whichever gender you identify with as well?
Yeah.
Like, where do you sort of sit with that?
It's a consideration of mine. We have, like, I've set up this little Facebook group that's private, and it's meant to sort of have deeper conversations about things that are personal to people. I've asked a lot of people so far, should I have a female group and a male group? Will people be more comfortable with their own kind, if you like? So far, the answer is no. If the answer is yes, then I'll change it. But the message in and of itself is for both sexes. I mean, anyone working in corporate Australia, anyone working in Australia would testify that if you've had a female leader, you've come across somebody who needs a good dose of softening the fuck up. So this is present in men. It's loud in men, and there's no doubt about that. And it's actually problematic in men. So there's a massive issue in terms of, male identity now. And I didn't want my expression to be, inequitable in its distribution. Because in order for the very deep issues in men, and Australian men particularly, that present itself in some pretty harrowing statistics, there has to be females involved in that conversation, because men need the overt permission to be themselves, and not to be called out. I mean, I've been in relationship with women who've told me to harden up, and I'm an ex pretty decent athlete. Anyone who's played for me as a coach, I'm not known for my gentle, loving nature on the sporting field at all. But I think this occurs everywhere, and the support for it needs to be unanimous across the area. I mean, in my journey, the other thing I'd say is I've experienced a lot of reverse sexism, which is interesting, right? And I understand it, actually. So what I mean by that is, like, I'll be entering into a space, whether it's trauma therapy or it's something like vulnerability, and guess what? There's not many blokes there. And so you get this, what are you doing here? Like, you don't do vulnerability, you're a man. In fact, I read an article 4 weeks ago saying exactly that. They talked about Brene Brown and vulnerability, and they skipped over men. I think it was a sentence they gave us. And then it all became a female thing to do, which is just wrong, and bloody wrong. So I don't want to encourage any more of it. I'm really keen to keep that a broader conversation across all people.
I think I really like that sentiment, because that's something that, actually sees into the next sort of observation that I want to share, and the question that I have, which is, I sometimes feel like there's a big call and big push to talk about things like vulnerability, that we should be vulnerable and everything like that. But it really takes two parties. It really needs the audience, or whoever I'm talking to also be willing to come to where the person who's sharing being vulnerable is. And sometimes I see this manifest in a few different ways. So, for example, one stereotype that I might have, and it's just my personal observation, is that vulnerability is often perceived to be about, sharing things that are painful, sharing things that are, it's about sort of crying or emotions and all that sort of stuff. But that's really one type of vulnerability. There are other types as well, which is around fear. There's sometimes vulnerability in terms of, and I don't know if you feel this, but sometimes I feel ashamed to share success, right? Because it's something that I find it difficult to talk about, because there's a perception of how vulnerability might look. And again, I'm just being purely, this is just purely my observation. But I do think that there's something to be said around how do we react to people who are vulnerable? You know, have we got the right practices and skills in place? Because I don't know, you've experienced this, is sometimes the worst type of reaction to someone being vulnerable is, Scott, you know what you need to do? You just need to do blah. And it's just like, it's demonstrating that there hasn't been that empathy there. So I'd love to throw it back to you. What kind of your perceptions and observations have you had on this?
Okay, so my take on it is that when I talk about being in that dinghy and being in the dark and seeing Brene Brown out there going, I want what she's got, which is truly what I was feeling. You know, I feel like vulnerability is like snow skiing. Yeah, you can't just jump on a pair and head down a hill, and then you get kind of sloppy expressions of vulnerability. And I know I've done that myself. You know, in a lot of the therapy and work that I've done. I said to a guy in a business session early this year, actually, he's like, wow, man, that was some session. Like, how did you come to get into this like strategy work? And I talked a little bit about it, and I said, look, ultimately it's about vigilance. Yeah. I mean, Sun Tzu tells us, strategy is about vigilance. Yeah. And he says, but how do you get that? And I said, oh, childhood trauma, mate. And the look on this guy's face was, I was like, oh, overshare. Whoops. And so it's a really sloppy expression of vulnerability, right? And that's just me getting used to my story and what parts of it truly serve other people. And that's taken me some time. And it is like skiing. Like if you jump on and head straight down, you're sure to stack it. If you're, unless you're a child, of course, they're exempt from that. But but yeah, I think that's the challenge. And I know just on Monday night I was having a chat with some guys I play baseball with, and it was so nice to sit and talk about relationships with women as if we were women. We talked about our feelings. We talked about how this person made him feel, and how this person made him feel, and how, oh God, she's not really ready because she doesn't understand this, and what's interesting is a lot of people out there would assert that this doesn't belong in men and it doesn't exist in men. It's not true. But we just don't have the tools to not be sloppy down the hill, right? And we just don't have the tools. And for me, I wouldn't have had them. I've just got an awesome therapist I see every fortnight. I wouldn't have had them either. And I still am a bit sloppy in that, yeah, still today. So, yeah, I really think that's what there is to do, is to start owning it. You will mess it up early. You'll stumble about a little bit. And I know you see this in corporate when you go and do workshops or whatever. Right, we're going to do a team vulnerability workshop, and then you see someone who's so narcissistic actually attempt to do one of these sessions, and it's quite funny actually, because it's such an out of body, like, oh, I'm going to be vulnerable. Last week I had a hole in the bottom of my shoe, and I didn't tell anyone. Yeah, not quite what we mean.
Oh, okay. So I'm gonna challenge you on that just a little bit. I'm just going to challenge you on that just a little bit, because this goes to what I was asking before around that definition.
Michael's got a couple of questions coming in here that I wouldn't mind touching on. So
absolutely.
Let me know how you want to manage that. Yep.
Yeah. So let me make this point, and then we'll come to some of these questions as well. The reason why is that because I think that there can sometimes be a perception of what vulnerability looks like. And so whilst I appreciate what that particular example is, if that was a slightly different example and it was someone just dipping their toes into trying to share something that was personal, sometimes that can be encouraged as well, right? It's about seeing that there's a spectrum of how people engage with things. One of the really interesting thought experiments that I sometimes do in this space, and just for, I guess, the transparency in the record, I do have these types of conversations quite frequently I have a great group of friends, guys and girls, and we speak about this, and it's taken, I understand the amount of practice and discipline it takes to kind of feel safe. However, sometimes the experience that I like to challenge is that if someone were to say something that is confronting in their vulnerability, there's a question of, do we shut that down, or do we say, well, no, if this person says something that we're uncomfortable with in their vulnerability, like, how do we catch that? So there's a question of what type of vulnerability can we accept as well. So I'd love to get your thoughts on that, and then we'll bring this question in.
Look, I think we're going to make space for people to show up how they'd like to show up, and we all make assessments and assertions about what people can handle, and sometimes we get that wrong too. I mean, sometimes we think that someone couldn't handle a conversation, along a particular set of lines, and I had a female boss in recent years who said to me, "Oh, I just wish you were more confident." Now, it's interesting because my external expression is everyone tells me how confident I am, which is ridiculous because I'm not. I've had a lot of insecurity most of my life, and I'm probably more comfortable in my own skin today than ever before. But what she was asserting about my lack of confidence made me giggle a little bit, because what I really wanted to say is, I don't lack confidence. You're just really triggering for me. I just really find you particularly triggering. So I talk about you a lot on Wednesdays. Yeah. Anyway, so it's interesting. Sometimes we've got reasons, right? Yeah, I think you've got to make a space to try and catch it. And if something's not welcome in this space, you can just kindly and gently, let that person know that, you can't help them with that particular thing, or you're not open to exploring it. I don't think. I've certainly seen that. People I get close to, or I've got a good relationship with, I'm very open about things that have happened to me and all that sort of stuff. And, some people, particularly men, will go, yeah, that's too much. There's to be too much love for me to sit here and stand in that space. That's too much. So, yeah, I've certainly had the feeling before where I've gone, oh, that's not his jam. He can't deal with that. I do find there's a very big difference, right? Sometimes when I tell my story, I have really different, and I don't want to be general. I don't want to generalize here because it's actually not true net. But I have had the experience of men saying to me, because I'm writing a book at the moment, so there's a commentary on that. And men saying to me, oh, you're going to include all the really bad shit, though, aren't you? And I'm like, what? Well, maybe if it's useful to somebody else, yes, but not for the sake of the violence, no. And yet I'll have women with the very same material read the book and go, oh, my God, that's so lovely. So it's, but that said, so men require a different kind of conversation around the same thing, yeah?
Yeah, and thank you for
touching on your point here about the baseball gathering. That space is created by, it's a masters baseball team. It's pretty social. We don't play on Sundays because we've all got little kids. And so play on Monday nights, and we got out and had a beer actually after our practice on Monday, and that was just quite an event for Melburnians. So, and we're just sitting around having a chat with two guys I'm pretty good friends with that I've built a friendship with over the last couple of years, and one in particular was kind of my lockdown buddy. We're both single dads, and we talk about lots of things that I think women would be impressed by, actually, or not. I'm not sure, but how do you create a space like that? I think I guess I tend to lead those conversations, but it's really cool to see how many men step into it.
Absolutely. I can actually, whilst I haven't been to your baseball gathering, I can perhaps also chip in a couple of things here as well, because like you, I'm always quite fascinated about talking about this type of stuff and creating spaces as well. One of the things that I found has been really important is to be able to set the parameters up front that allows for intentionality of people coming into the space. So knowing this is a space that we are going to be able to talk about things, but then having actually some rules in place around how to have that type of conversation, I found has been actually really important. So for example, one of the small things that we tend to have as a rule is not doing solutions for people. Like when we talk about actually really listening to people, it really means listening to people and whatever they might say. It is a case of if a guy were to join the group and they're only comfortable with like 0.5% vulnerability, that is enough for us to be able to work with, because we want to celebrate that. Because for the guy that might have joked before about, I got a hole in my shoe, that might even be a small test of water for them. And so we want to create that type of a safe environment for people to have. And so we have all these tiny little rules that it's almost like it's almost like when you're at the gym, you want to know that everyone can use the equipment in the same sort of way, because it's safe for yourself and it's safe for people around you as well. And so we'll do things like, no solutions for anyone. It is listening. And it also is about asking whoever's sharing an issue to even be able to say, how intense is the feedback that I want from people? Allowing a bit of that and really being able to listen into that. There's quite a few things in here that enable both, but it really is both. Someone has to show up and they have to feel like they have a space to share, and then on the receiving end, or everybody else, we have to equally create the space that creates that trust. And I have seen situations where we have new people come in and they can potentially trample over everyone because they don't quite know how to either regulate or have the same shared set of rules around how we created that safe environment, and that can throw the dynamic off. So that's why sometimes setting the intentions up front becomes really important.
Yeah, and it's also, I mean, I think this is, I really don't want to generalize because across sexes or between sexes, because it's, but I can talk to being a man because I've sort of tried to do that. So, but I found that there are acceptable norms that are not accepted or not accepted in people's hearts. So particularly with guys, and you'll see in a sporting team or whatever, the kind of things that get said, the kind of sexist remarks, the way women are spoken about still happens loudly and proudly. But if you pull those guys up and go, you don't really feel that way. Yeah, you're right. I don't. So why are you saying it, man? And it's true. I have friends that are really good people, amazing human beings, incredible fathers, yet will come out with some comment about their partner or something like that. And you go, and I've actually said it to a couple of friends, you don't mean that. You adore her. Shut up. Don't talk like that. But, that pattern interrupts required. Yeah. So in those particular spaces or circumstances. But I think what's important to point out about the fruits of all this stuff, the fruits of being authentic. If you think about how being anything else, betrays itself otherwise, this is a real thing about, for me as a father, I have an 11-year-old daughter, right? So I'm on the precipice of some fairly big chats. And I will be having those chats with her about porn culture and a whole bunch of other stuff that's really concerning. But there's a lot of kids out there that will not have those chats with their parents. And those chats are needed, just like it's okay for a boy to cry. And they need to be given permission and space to do that. And it is not an indictment upon their ability to be a man or to man up. It's a perfectly natural thing for men to have emotions and feelings. Some of our behaviors, so you'll notice when a guy breaks up with a girl or whatever, it's common. The woman would go, I can't believe it, he hooked up again. The truth of that, in my hypothesis of that, and it is just a hypothesis, who do we talk to about our feelings? Who do we talk to about how we genuinely feel? And so I think, just a hypothesis, that many men jump into the next connection because it's a way of them feeling better because they don't have the tools or access points to have the conversations that are necessary to heal themselves of the hurt, right? So all those things need to be talked about.
Absolutely. And on that note, I'd love to bring up this question from Shannon as well. Are there ways we can create a sense of space to be vulnerable and to safely bring to someone's attention that their comments aren't appropriate? It's a big question, Shannon. I think it's a big question, and it's a tough question as well, because there's, it can be, on the one hand, we're talking about allowing people to be able to speak how they speak, and recognizing that perhaps they're at a different stage of a particular journey to where everyone else is, but then also helping them educate on that. I don't have a immediate. I don't have the silver bullet, unfortunately. But I'll take a crack, and then Scott, I'll throw over to you as well. But I want to reflect on some conversations, for example, that I've had with some family friends and family members as well recently, where comments were made that were quite uncomfortable for me. And at first, and yes, there were things like politics involved and all that sort of stuff. And at first, my reaction was one of frustration and was one of like, this is like, you can't say those types of things. But what I realized afterwards was that for me, as somebody who talks about this type of stuff all the time and who thinks about a lot of these things, like my history of experience in sitting in a space of vulnerability might be a lot longer. Whereas the people that I was speaking to, their space and their experience was really actually quite short. The information and the different perspectives they've seen are of a generation that is completely different to mine. And so where I made a mistake was actually being too hard on pushing back and saying those kinds of comments are inappropriate. And instead, it needed me to be more empathetic and more willing to say, well, I don't want you to not talk to me. And so what I actually need to do is expand my space outwards to say, yes, I understand what you're saying. I understand what you're hearing. Let me try to understand where you're coming from. Why did you make those comments? What did you think about that? What was going through your head? And can I understand why? And so it needed actually more energy on my behalf to be able to expand outwards and to be able to connect with them in order to be able to say, you see, that point where we connect, that's the part where I can build something from. That's been my experience. It hasn't been the easiest as well, but that's what I've tried, and it feels like it's making a little bit of a dent. What do you think?
Look, me personally, have always struggled with boundaries and connection. Yeah, clumsy connection for me has been historically a boundary issue, or boundary setting issue. So I would say historically I was probably capable of catching anything that was thrown at me, but equally very, very guilty of oversharing about things that weren't welcome in a particular space. I think the creation of a sense of space is really, I think, is done in the expression of intention. And, I'm here to support you with this. I really want to be here for this. Or even in terms of whether it's inappropriate or whatever, I really want to see you talk about this because clearly you want to. I just don't think I'm the best person to help you with it. Would be how I would gently, and if I knew somebody who was, then I would recommend them. But that would be the way that I would gently kind of walk somebody away from something that's not, welcome. And in terms of myself, it's something I've always got to be constantly on guard for, because I know it's in my nature just to go and vomit detail upon people that they're just not ready for. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that's the kind of thing where, if flipping this around a bit and say, what if, we're the people making the comments that are inappropriate to someone else? I just think from the reverse empathy perspective, the type of situation we're in is a bit of an assessment of our intentions, which is we're just two guys having a chat about something, and we want to do the best that we can. And where we are might be a little bit different to whoever might be listening to us. But if people were to have come in here and sort of said, no, this is like, shut this down, this is all inappropriate, it makes it difficult for us to actually be vulnerable. And this is that duality that I come back to of vulnerability requires people to have that willingness, but also it needs the people on the receiving end to be able to catch that, understand it, and then have a conversation about that to sort of see where that inappropriateness or whatever that might be. And that fosters the trust that allows us to say, well, actually, hey, I just had this great conversation with Scott, and you know what? I shared something. It was a little bit of a little drip there, but he caught it and he seemed okay with it. He seemed at least willing to listen to me. Whereas if he had shut me down, I'd be like, okay, I know I should talk to Scott about that. And you've closed that door forever. And I think that's a real shame when that happens.
It's a good point. Trust is the fuel of vulnerability, in my view. It has to be there as a platform between two people. And I think it's an essential point, and that we understand what it is we can rely on certain people for, and what kind of conversations are appropriate in those spaces. And you see this in workplaces a lot, where people are like, we're doing a leadership development thing, and so we want to talk about that. Really? Well, how much of me do you really want to know? Like, right? Really, how much do you really want to know? Because if, venting my spleen means admitting I had a hole in my shoe, then okay, that's the boundary. We're going to play with that. You know, I once had a boss who, talked about the harrowing experiences of her nanny being late in the morning, and which I could not quite connect with. But, but yeah, I think it's about figuring out what's appropriate in the space and what people genuinely mean. I mean, this is like vulnerability is a little bit like strategy, right? It's just a word that people throw out there with not due consideration to its meaning or its application. So, and this with strategy happens all day, every day. So it's not a strategy, it's a tactic. So this is my common thing. You can pull a string on my back, it will say that, yeah.
And where I really like that is that it really states that there are multiple ways for us to be able to reach people in order for them to be authentic / vulnerable. That it isn't just necessarily in a circle of men or women just talking. That there can be one-on-ones, it can be forum, it can be this, it can be that, but it's recognizing that there are multiple different ways, and that we need to be very cognizant of that, because the other side of this these days is this, is our bipartisan nature, so to speak, where there is partisan nature, where it's become hard to have conversations with people because it finds it so hard to kind of connect. And so that's where I really like that word strategy, because this is about saying, yes, in order for other people to open up to us, we have to catch all of that and create all these different pathways. And it takes effort. It's not going to be easy, but I think that's where it's really important. And I really like where, I really admire and respect your vulnerability and authenticity in being able to share about this. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you. It's an absolute pleasure. It's a topic that I'm increasingly passionate about. It's one I've struggled with so much. I think to disarm the pretender in me, when the sporting fields and corporate environments, they've taught me to layer up, to harden up, to put stuff atop of what my true self is, to show up in a certain way, to be able to fire people at will as if I'm an executioner in a prison camp, with no heart or soul, or concern for the people that I'm affecting. What business asks of us and what society asks of us as human beings it's just not cool. And we have to. It's okay that we have to do these things functionally for a job. Yeah. What's not okay is that we're not held in the space of safety afterward about how much it troubled us to do it. So if you've got to fire somebody, that is one of the hardest things you'll ever do. And most people who've done it know that. But the lack of empathy for people doing the firing is, that's where the work needs to get done. That's where we need to be able to create spaces for people to go, hey, you must be feeling really bad, right? Because you've just, shot 30 people in Sector 12 or whatever, And it's just, there's not enough around it. And I think a lot of the intervention programs we see in corporate are lip service, and they're not real, and they're not places that people feel safe to show up in.
Absolutely. And I just really like that last little point that you made about that particular example of firing someone. Like, it could be so easy for that person to become an enemy somewhere, that person becomes the bad person. But that's where we, if we had to really demonstrate that empathy, it is to say, well, that's a real person there too, and they've perhaps gone through something that's been just as tough for them. And so to be able to lay things on top of them, that's not good. That's actually really bad, and it doesn't demonstrate the broader empathy that we want to be able to foster in order to have really meaningful, safe and trustworthy conversations as well. So yeah,
it's pretty critical now too. I mean, one of the things that my business does is measures resilience in organizations. Now, resilience, agility, it's kind of interchangeable. What we're measuring is the organization's ability as a collective to respond to external circumstances. But when we talk to resilience, and I've written some articles about resilience and courage and things like that, we also need to pay homage to the fact that being resilient is not just about hardening up. It's actually about having the soft conversations that allow you to be bloody real in those moments and own the stuff that's really troubling you, that's bothering you about what's happening, or that's frightening you about the security of your job, or about a colleague who's really doing it hard right now at home. If those conversations or those spaces are made for those conversations, then organizations become more resilient. You don't become more resilient by just hardening up some more. That's the wrong way to go back. And that's what we continue to ask people to do. In fact, there was a men's health woman who I dropped like a bag of bricks, who I was kind of friends with, who was doing some work around men's therapy and things like that. But she sent an article out that said all men need to do is harden up some more. And I was like, no, girl, no, that's not what's needed. Not at all. In fact, there's way too much of that, both in men and women today. So much so that men sort of fumbling around going, where do I belong again? What am I supposed to be doing? Because, I'm not, holding out a violin, but gee whiz, surely equity doesn't get done in separation. So surely, right? And, I don't think the answer is, let's have men's groups too. I mean, that's ridiculous, right? It doesn't solve the issue. The issue is that we need to be freely able to be ourselves with men or women in spaces that are acceptable. Yeah. So that's my view. I hope I haven't offended anyone with that view, but.
Well, if anything, I'd say it adds to the texture of it. And it is precisely, again, why I wanted to have these types of conversations and to have this type of forum as well, to be able to explore the texture into it, because there are worlds in which resilience is important, and the hardening up type of resilience is important. There are worlds in which that can exist, but just as equally are worlds in which being soft also exists as well. And I think that entire texture is something that is important for us to all consider. So I really welcome having that conversation.
Could I say that a little bit differently for you? Because I did talk about it on LinkedIn article about it a few months ago. One of the things that I said is I talked about courage, yeah? And I said that courage was afforded to me because I know that my team love me. I know that they care about who I am. I know that they care about what I'm going through. I know that they care that they've got my back. Yeah. And so in a way, not in any way, I think that the foundation of being able to be courageous, to be resilient, to go the extra mile, that foundation is vested in love and support and trust. Yeah. So the softness must precede any hardness. Yeah. And we see this in the military too. Absolutely. Is it the Israeli army that trains people for the same people for 20 years and they stay in exactly the same group that whole time? They never move regiments. They're always with the same guys because they're trying to build the ultimate trusted connection between those people.
Absolutely. I love that. Thank you, Scott. Thank you so much for this conversation. I think we'll call it time there. I'm really glad to have people joining us in this conversation as well. Shannon, thank you so much for your comments. There's another person who left some questions. Unfortunately, all it says on my screen is LinkedIn user, so I don't know who it is, but thank you so much for your contribution as well.
There's one question about the mindfulness work with men, and I hope I've cleared that up in some of the comments that I've made. So,
yeah. Scott, where can people go to find you?
Oh, you can get me at I am Scotty M on LinkedIn or Twitter for that matter. You can visit my blog if you like, which is either softenthefuckup.com or iamscottym.com. And if you want to do some business stuff, then you can catch me at theartofmore.com.au.
Fantastic. I hope everyone checks it out. Fantastic. That's it for us. Thank you so much to everyone who's joined the session. This is, of course, available behind once this session is finished as well. So I do hope everyone comes along to check it out. If anyone wants to continue these types of conversations with myself or with Scott as well, you can find us all on LinkedIn. And if you have topics you'd like us to explore on Open Minds too, please do drop me a message. Like I said, this type of conversation is stuff that I am very, very passionate about because I do think we need to explore complexity. We need to explore nuance. We need to explore different types of conversations and recognize that this is a journey for all of us to work through and that we're all at different stages of it. So thank you so much for being with us today, Scott. Thank you again for your time.
Thanks for
See you
having me.
later.
Cheers.